Sacramento, California, after midnight. Stephanie Berry is driving some friends home. As she doesn't know her way around this part of town, the friends advise her to take Interstate 5 north to get home. Despite these instructions, Stephanie drives in the wrong direction. What happened next can only be explained by scientific and psychological analysis. In a mountainous area outside Sacramento, a fisherman makes a gruesome discovery. He finds the half-naked body of a young woman. She is lying in a flooded irrigation ditch. There is a dark red discoloration on her neck, a sign that she has been strangled. It was a very remote area near a cornfield. There were no houses or other signs of civilization. The two shoulder straps of her top are severed, and the back is cut open from top to bottom. The victim was obviously tied up. Small branches and leaves under her bra also suggest that she was dragged to the ditch after her death. The police find a pair of scissors near her body. They suspect that her clothes were cut up with them. At the autopsy, traces of semen are also found, but the samples are unusable for a DNA test. The victim is identified as 19-year-old Stephanie Berry. When investigators see on a family video that Stephanie had long hair, they realize that the killer cut it off. Rabondi heads the Sacramento Homicide Squad. My first thought was, we're dealing with a perverted fetishist who cuts off hair. I'd never seen anything like this in 100 other murder cases. Did he cut off the hair to take it home as a trophy or souvenir? We didn't know. We all had the same thought about this case. We urgently need to find the killer because he will continue to kill. Stephanie Berry's car is found 20 miles away from Interstate 5, but it's pointing in the wrong direction. A month later, another incident occurs along Interstate 5. 26-year-old Clara Saber and her mother had eaten dinner in a restaurant. On the way home, their car breaks down on a remote section of Interstate 5. A man in a black sports car stops and offers his help, but the car only has 2 seats. So mother and daughter decide that Clara should go for a ride to get help. This is the last time her mother sees her. A few months later, in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada in California, a hunter discovers the badly decomposed remains of a young white woman. Animals have scattered the remains, but the investigators find a few items of clothing in addition to the skull and torso. These clothes are similar to those of Clara Saber, who disappeared 3 months ago on Interstate 5. Until then, there had been no trace of her. The cause of death is strangulation. The string of her blouse has been cut out. Together with a piece of yellow nylon cord, it served as a rope. Parts of her pantyhose are also cut out and tied around her wrists. The victim's underpants and the shoulder straps of her bra are also cut up. Criminologist Jack Streeter analyzes the clothing. I had never seen clothes cut up like that before. This behavior was completely new, and other investigators I spoke to also confirmed this to me. In any other case, the cutting would make sense, but here it was so unusual that it became the killer's calling card. This seemingly senseless act was the killer's trademark. Similar to Stephanie Berry, Clara's body was found more than 50 miles from where her car had broken down. Clara's mother could not describe the driver accurately, as she could not recognize him properly in the darkness. She only remembers that he was a white man in his 40s with a large nose and pale skin. Bruce Henderson describes the sophistication of this murderer in his book, Trace Evidence. He misled the police by transporting his victims over long distances and leaving no traces such as fingerprints that could link him to the crime or the victims. 2 weeks later, the police are alerted again. Another murder, 35 miles southeast of Sacramento. It is the decomposed body of a white woman. It lies just a few miles away from where Stephanie Berry's body was dumped. She had been bound hand and foot with her own shirt. Her arms were tied behind her back, and the shirt was also wrapped around her neck. She was strangled with it. Her backless top and stockings were cut in the same seemingly senseless way. The body is identified on the basis of dental examinations. It is 20-year-old Laura Duke. The last time Laura is seen before her death is in a red light district in Sacramento. She is there with her boyfriend, James Riggers. The two need money for drugs, and Riggers subsequently tells the police that Laura agreed to prostitution. Laura drove off with a client in a white car. James Riggers says he never saw her again after that. Riggers takes a lie detector test and fails. Is he her boyfriend or her killer? Although the police now have a suspect, the investigation continues. They want to set a trap for the murderer, with decoys disguised as prostitutes. But despite all their efforts, more murders continue to take place. On a path in the Creek Forest, hikers discover strange traces of blood. They follow the tracks and find the naked body of a white woman. She has been stabbed in the neck, chest, and shoulder. Her shirt, shorts, and underwear are cut up in the same senseless way as in the other cases. The victim is identified as 25-year-old Kaylee Finch. She is divorced and the mother of a 2-year-old daughter. Her car is found near Interstate 5, completely intact, but this time the investigators make another discovery: a piece of tape in her hair. It was immediately clear that this had also happened to Stephanie Berry. So he cut off her hair. As in the other cases, he probably drove his victim in front of him, bound and gagged with tape. He usually removes the tape later, but this time something goes wrong. Kaylee Finch probably resisted vigorously. This makes the murderer uneasy, and he stabs her with the scissors. He strangled all his other victims. He then hurriedly leaves the crime scene without completely removing the tape. A few weeks later, the police find another victim. The naked and decomposed body of 18-year-old Darcy Franklin Powell lies in a deserted area off the highway near Lake Tahoe. Her pantyhose are stuck in her mouth, and her clothes are haphazardly cut up. The cause of death is strangulation. Her blouse is tied around her neck with some kind of screw. There are also pieces of rope near her clothes. He was basically having fun with her, with this screw around her neck. He probably pulled her back and forth. Sometimes she had to stand still, then walk again. She always had to do what he said, and she hoped he wouldn't do anything. But in the end, he strangled her. The rope found at the crime scene is made of nylon. After a long investigation, the police find out that such a rope is used for parachutes. James Riggers failed the lie detector test, but he is no longer a suspect. For example, he has no car to tow the victims to the remote locations. He also has no connection to parachutes. The Riggers file is closed. Now the homicide squad is once again concentrating on the murderer's signature. For some reason, cutting up his clothes has a special meaning for him, which is why he practices it in all his murder cases. Criminologist and author Stefan Harbort is an expert on such conspicuous perpetrator behavior. Harbort has analyzed all murders committed by German serial killers from 1945 to the present day and created numerous offender profiles. This knowledge forms the basis for several of his books on case analysis. Cutting up the victim's clothing in a certain way indicates that this action was of central importance to the perpetrator. It can be assumed that it represents a special emotional thrill for him. From the point of view of criminal psychology, this act is particularly noteworthy because the sexual perversion of fetishism shines through. Sexuality and ritual. In this case, the connection is fatal. Serial killers with a sadistic or fetishistic disposition in particular tend to celebrate a certain pattern of crime through certain sequences of acts that have a ritualistic character, which then characterizes them as serial offenders. His American colleagues also agree that the perpetrator is a mentally unstable serial killer. His signature consists of the cut-up items of clothing. Then the investigators come across a case from over 20 years ago. Could this man be the most wanted mass murderer in California? The manhunt for a serial killer in California takes an unexpected turn. Deborah Dory is a street prostitute in the center of Sacramento. One evening she gets into a customer's car. The two drive to a parking lot. After parking the car, the client becomes violent. He smashes her head against the dashboard and tries to handcuff her. Deborah somehow manages to escape. By chance, a police patrol is nearby, notices the attack and arrests the assailant. The man's name is Roger Kirby. He is 48 years old, the manager of a public warehouse, married and has a daughter from a previous marriage. The police investigate Roger Kirby's past and discover that he was arrested 30 years ago at the age of 15. He stole underwear from a washing line and cut it up senselessly and indiscriminately with his mother's scissors. Dr. Michael Osterheider has been studying the abnormal psyche of violent offenders for years. These people usually have great difficulty making contact and communicating. They are often marginalized, socially inhibited people who find access to something that arouses their desire through an object, in this case clothes. As a rule, these are people who have difficulty making contact with women, for example, and experience fetishism as their form of sexual gratification. Roger Kirby had a bad relationship with women, as he told the police, especially with his mother. If we go back into the biographies of our patients, we often see early patterns of disturbance in childhood, including behavioral problems of a partly medical psychological nature, bedwetting, speech delays such as stuttering, etc., and school failure, early delinquency, small-scale thefts, or even very significant cruelty to animals, which can then take on a certain extent. Roger Kirby is a parachutist, and a parachute cord was found at one of the crime scenes. Kirby's brother works for the Nevada Homicide Squad, which comes as no surprise to the investigators. They already suspect that the murderer is familiar with crime-solving techniques. Roger Kirby owns 2 cars. One resembles the vehicle Clara Saber got into, and in the other, the police find a piece of rope with a choke screw at the end, as well as handcuffs and a pair of scissors. We knew Roger Kirby was the killer, but we lacked the evidence to convict him of murder. The dead bodies provided few clues. The semen found on the victims had either rotted away or been washed away by rain and snow. Criminologist Faye Springer is an expert in trace evidence, a method of linking suspects or victims to crime scenes. Springer examines thousands of hairs, fibers, and other materials found on the victim's clothing. On Darcy Franklin Powell's dress, she finds 2 carpet fibers. They are blue, triangular, and made of nylon. When she compares the fibers with those of the floor mats in Roger Kirby's car, she notices that they are the same color, size, and shape. They are also made of the same polymer and dyed with the same chemicals. On closer inspection, Springer discovers something else on the fibers. Under the microscope, she recognizes impurities on the surface. Egg-shaped particles that later turn out to be fungus-like spores. These spores can also be found on the fibers of the floor mat in Kirby's car. The human hair found on one of the victim's dresses is microscopically similar to the hair found on Kirby's thigh. Springer also discovered hair from 2 dogs and a cat on this dress. Roger Kirby owns 2 dogs and a cat. Finally, the detective examines the pantyhose used to bind the wrists and notices something that was previously overlooked. Sometimes it's an advantage to be a woman in this job. For example, you know that tights are turned inside out when you take them off. When she turns the tights inside out again, Springer discovers lots of little fibers, especially on the back of her thighs. When she compares these fibers with those on Kirby's passenger seat, she notices a microscopic similarity. Finally, she examines the pieces of rope found in Kirby's car and in his storage shed. At first glance, they appear to be identical to the rope found near Darcy Franklin Powell's body. All are made of white nylon with 6 fibers and 32 individual strands. But when Springer takes a closer look at the rope under the microscope, she notices something strange. Some red color and a few black particles, and the same color particles I saw on the other piece found on Laura Duke's body. That established an almost unmistakable link between Roger Kirby and Darcy Franklin. But the paint particles are tiny, only about 6 micromillimeters in size. A comprehensive analysis of the inorganic components of the paint was only possible under an electron microscope. 10 different elements were found, quite common in the chemical composition of red acrylic acid paint. But 2 more unusual elements were also found: sodium and chlorine. These are air impurities, and they are found on all 3 parts of the rope, as is the red color. It has obviously been sprayed in the vicinity of the stick. Science therefore provides the necessary proof. The rope found on Darcy Franklin Powell's body and the ropes found in Roger Kirby's car and in his storage shed must have been close together when someone apparently sprayed a red acrylic acid paint from a can. The rope was basically the coup de grace in all the cases. The same red color was on the 3 strings. And that meant that Roger Kirby had been at the scene of Darcy's crime. I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, he's in trouble. He's guilty." The murder of Darcy Franklin Powell is solved. Roger Kirby is found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. The other murders cannot yet be proven against Kirby. Roger is only in prison for 1 murder. There must be another trial. The other families also need a reconciliation in court. But the police have missed one thing. Kirby confessed everything to his wife the very evening he was arrested. Until that evening, I hadn't known that he had anything to do with the murders. But when he was arrested, I was sitting next to him in the police car, and he told me that he had killed 4 people. Many offenders feel relieved. With serial offenders, you often see that they take ever greater risks. You can get the feeling that they're out to get caught, so to speak. Some have told us very clearly that they have experienced this as a relief, so that worse things don't happen. On the other hand, there are also perpetrators who play with the investigators, who lay traps, who want to distract them, and who also experience playing with the investigators as an additional thrill, as an additional power factor. Roger Kirby played with both the police and his victims. There is still the possibility that he will also be found guilty of the other murders. But despite all the evidence so far, the proof is lacking. "I wish I could have prevented these murders," said Kirby's wife. But the murders only came to an end when forensic science was able to convict Roger Kirby.